Good morning, everyone. Welcome to our first Risk and Insurance Committee meeting for 2024. Let's start with apologies. We have none. We've got everyone here, which is great. Kai tells us that we have no late items. We've got our conflicts of interest recorded as normal. Does anyone have any particular specific conflict of interest they wanted to declare in relation to any of the items in this committee meeting? Great, thank you. Let's turn now to the minutes from the 5th of December meeting. The recommendation is that these minutes be taken as read and confirmed as a true and correct record. Does anyone have any questions, comments, or additions or edits in relation to those minutes?
Through Mr. Chairman, yes, just one comment. On page 2 of those minutes, I'm being shown as the Deputy Mayor again. Can we get that right? Unless I've been promoted and don't know about it.
More likely to be a Freudian slip, I think. Councillor. Okay, thank you. With that edit, Councillor Hughes will move and Councillor Prendergast will second the resolution that the minutes be taken as a true and correct record and confirmed. Okay, let's turn on now to our first item, which is the Health and Safety and Wellbeing Quarterly Report. Welcome, Tansha, and can I start by just recording how disappointed for us, but delighted for you, that you're moving on to what Ben would describe as greener pastures. I'm not sure that Tanya would describe Waitomo as greener pastures, but nevertheless, I just wanted to record and thank you for your efforts in front of this committee, the reports that you've done. So we really appreciate that. We are sorry to see you go. And we'll hope that you realise your mistake quickly and come back. Okay. Let's take your report as read, Tansha. Is there anything?
Through you, Chair, excuse me. Can I just introduce our new manager, People and Capability?
Of course.
Noah started with us on Monday. In a new role. It's the first time we've had a permanent role of this nature in our organisation, and delighted to say that this is a shared role with CoLab. So Noah will work roughly 4 days for us and a day for CoLab, depending on obviously the peaks and troughs of our organisation's demands and what's kind of pressing. But yeah, I just wanted to introduce Noah to the committee.
Wonderful. Thank you, Noah. Great to have you join us. Through my association with this committee and with CoLab, you will hopefully not come to regret the fact that you'll see a lot of me. Excellent. Okay. Tansha, thank you for your report. We'll take it as read. Is there anything, Tansha, that you wanted to draw our attention to or highlight before we move to questions?
Yes, good morning. One of the highlights, I think, for this report is the EAP, the Employee Assistance Program. Since we've changed providers, we've noticed a significant jump in uptake on that. And possibly one of the reasons is because these are AI tools that staff can use, especially with modern technology today. You know, they're on their phone, they can access it 24/7. You know, late at night, early in the morning, when they feel comfortable because they're in their own environment to be able to, and plus the opportunity to speak to therapists, where they can actually choose their own therapists based on gender, culture, a number of opportunities there for them to choose and feel comfortable. And plus they're known that it's completely anonymous as well too. Yeah, so we've had a really good uptake with that as well. Thank you.
Thanks, Tanja. That's a really good initiative. Well done. And I thought the wellbeing report was interesting. So I think it's a great initiative. Okay, I've got one question, but I'll defer to my colleagues. Does anyone have any questions of Tanja in respect to the report? Councillor Hughes.
Thank you, Chair. Hi, Tasha, how are you?
Thanks, Steve. Yep.
Sad to hear that you're going. Sorry about that. So I'll just make a point first, just before Christmas, I think it was, Tasha, you and I had a bit of a
Yes.
meeting for about an hour just to discuss, or just for me to get a bit of an oversight into how the health and safety systems at the council work. And it was a very productive hour. I thought it was great. We discussed a few things. I think probably I was impressed at some of the policies and how they've been enacted within within the organisation. That was good. I think probably the one thing I found a little bit worrying was we discussed this about the disconnect with the teams down the bottom, like the organisation like water and the parks and facilities teams, where they're a bit disjointed and there's not an overall like they don't come together in the mornings and have team toolbox type sort of things, and they really probably don't know what each other's doing a lot of the time. I think so we talked about the culture amongst the people in the.
I actually did follow that up as well too. I did speak to facilities and actually one of the managers and ran their idea, and they said they have actually done it in the past, but they have found that it wasn't really necessary because it's such a small organisation, and we actually share like for example with the digger and stuff, and they're in constant contact the whole time as well. So
Yeah, I think you still got to have embedded some sort of system where they can all interact with each other on a health and safety basis. Though, you know, I mean, you've been in contact with different teams, I mean, that does work up to a point, but that was the only thing I really found that was sort of probably having one place where they could all congregate in the morning before work, just as work started, just to say, hey, what are you doing today? What risks are involved in this job and this sort of thing. So that was only, but everything else seemed to be pretty good from what I could see. Just a couple of little points around the 9-hour break. Was that, I would presume the 9 hours was chosen as like an 8-hour break with a half an hour travel each way home. Is that where the 9 hours come in? Or is that fairly standard, or
that was a standard.
Okay.
Right, yeah. I mean, most of our staff don't live that far away from work anyway.
Yeah, no, that's okay. I just sort of wasn't sure where the 9 hours came from. Site inspections, 4.5B. I see you sort of haven't been able to. So who actually does the site inspections? Each department's
Managers.
own
yeah,
managers.
Yes,
Okay.
they designate staff to do the site inspections.
Okay, so that if the targets aren't being reached every month, is that, the reasons behind?
Well, as I stated in the report there, obviously, because we haven't had a manager, we're just recruiting a manager for roading. We're recruiting a manager for works as well too. The engineering, network engineering was doing the site reports, when Ricardo had left. And now that we've got, the roading manager, because our contractor had been doing the reports in the interim as well, and he only was part-time.
So was it a little bit difficult, I suppose, to get somebody to fill in an interim, like, I mean, these site inspections are probably quite important, I would think. Most of these jobs, so was there somebody available who could have done them anyway so that you could get to your targets? Regardless, I mean, an overall sort of health and safety, from an overall health and safety view, any one of the managers probably could have gone to a different department to do it. So
True, and it's something that we should probably explore as well too, to make sure that we are. And also plus the fact that over the Christmas period as well, there weren't a lot of jobs.
Oh,
going
I
on as well
fully
too.
understand that.
Yeah.
Yeah,
So-
no, that's right. No, that's pretty much it, I think.
Great, thanks, councillor. I think it's going to be very useful to see what the next meeting numbers look like in terms of that lead indicator. I think the point that Tansha made from a mitigation perspective in terms of the period and the people makes sense in the context of that period. I think it's going to be really interesting to see what the numbers come out into the next period in terms of whether we need to have a greater focus on that.
We're very confident that the numbers will be back on track.
Perfect, thank you. So, and also thank you for spending time with Tansha. I think that, you know, one of the tricky issues always in the health and safety space is to scale activity to reflect the available resource. You can't, as you know, necessarily apply a large organization's rules, policies and procedures into a smaller organization. So the mere fact that you've had this conversation, that Tansha's obviously had conversations and had the feedback, and they've made a conscious decision to do something or not do something, I think is really valuable. It just shows an organization which is asking questions, taking it back into the organization, getting some feedback and making decisions based on experience. I think that's really valuable. So thank you. Does anyone of my colleagues have any questions in relation to this report? Councillor Jeffries.
Just a couple of quick ones, Mr. Chairman. Tansha, yeah, sorry to see you going. Noah's got some big shoes to fill, I think. So yeah, you'll be missed. Yeah. Yeah, I just interested. 23 employees use that self-help tool, but do you think that that fairly low percentage, because it's below that organisational average of 50, is that simply because you think it might be a new tool that people perhaps aren't used to?
For sure,
Yeah,
definitely.
or
it's like anything, if you introduce something new, everybody's going to jump on board with that before.
Yep.
And maybe test the waters as well too.
Yep.
But I'm confident that a lot of staff are still using the tools available.
right. Oh, it'll be good to see that percentage come up at least to the 50 next time, perhaps.
Well, I actually had a meeting with Clearhead to debrief on the actual report and the data as well too. We talked about whether they can actually scale it down to, obviously it's got anxiety in there, whether it's work-related anxiety.
Right.
So they're actually gonna get more detailed data. So by the next report, we'll be able to narrow it down to the actual areas.
Yeah. No, that's a good point. I actually did wonder about whether there was whether all of the concerns expressed were work related or
Yes,
whether
that's right.
it was personal stuff. Yep. And just one other thing, that graph that shows the injuries in December 21 to Feb 22. Are we able to know what those injuries were? Because
Not off the top of my head,
No,
I don't, but I
okay.
can get them to you.
it's just that that graph indicates that there were no injuries right through till December, February, and then all of a sudden we've had, is it four or five? I just wondered what the cause of that was, maybe.
Yes, I can get that information to you.
Okay, oh, that's great.
There was actually, you've jumped on the only question I had, Councillor Jeffries, which was in relation to those injuries. And really the question for me is whether the fact that there were injuries raised any material issues from your perspective, Tansha, in terms of whether there were any changes to systems or processes that justify, that needed to be done as a result of those injuries. So it sounds like that's something you know about, or is it something you're going to come back to us on?
There's something I can come back to you on.
Would you mind? I think from my perspective, I'm really interested to know, are there any lessons that we've learned as a result of those injuries occurring that we should make sure we put in place some things to make sure that
Sure.
because mistakes happen. I mean,
That's
injuries occur, but if there's anything systemic we can do to change those outcomes for the future. Sorry, Councillor Jeffries, I jumped in.
No problem. Thanks, Mr. Chairman. There was just one other quick one in relation to the graph too that shows, I don't know if there's a page number there or not, but it was on the page that's headed clear-head engagement, and it shows the general user base and Ōtorohanga District Council. There's a couple of graphs at the bottom of that page, and there's 4 green bar graphs that show, and all of them got 21.7% across the top of them.
Sorry. You have very.
Oh, okay. Yeah, there's a page there that has 4 green bar graphs on it, and they all show 21.7 across the top of them. And then down the bottom, there's a range of, I'm not too sure. I just wasn't, perhaps I just don't understand it, but I don't
Oh,
know.
there's the age.
Had the same number of in all of the age groups.
So you could have 21.7 across every age group. Okay, that's fine. It just wasn't
Use
clear
it
to me
separate
that.
in the
Yep.
class, yeah.
Yep.
And 13% on a lower age or younger age group.
Right, okay, no, I understand now. Thank you. That's all I had. Thanks.
Great, okay, anyone else? Okay, on that basis, His Worship will move and Councillor Jeffries will second that the committee receive the report from Tancha. That's number 1. And number 2, that we acknowledge and thank Tancha and wish her all the best. Thank you, Tancha. Please keep your Ōtorohanga jacket. You may need it for the future.
Thank you.
Excellent. Thanks, Noah, and welcome. Okay, let's move to the next report, which is Mark's report on capital projects. Mark, welcome. Okay, we'll take the report as read. New roading manager sitting beside you?
No, this is probably one of the projects that we've been. This is Robbie Whiteman, our manager of the projects delivery team.
Excellent.
So I thought it'd be really good for him to attend today in case we had any further questions around some of the major projects going on in town, and to put a name to the face, because I do mention him regularly in my reports. So
Excellent. Welcome, Robbie. Thank you for coming. Okay, so we're going to take your report as read. Mark, is there anything in particular that you want to highlight or add to the report before we go to Q&A?
no, I don't think so. I just probably just around some of those projects and the challenges we're facing, and I think we've sort of discussed that at each meeting so far. I still think we're heading in the right direction. We're definitely overcoming those challenges as they come along. So it's just about managing those issues and dealing with it at the time. And overall, we're heading in the right direction. I just want to give some comfort to council that this is probably common in large infrastructure projects. It has to be fluid. No pun intended there. But yeah, fluid way we deliver.
Things never quite go to plan with capital delivery projects, do they? I think that I'm always minded of Mike Tyson's famous comment that no battle plan survives the first punch in the face. So just before we go to questions, I just had some feedback, Mark, just in relation to the report. This report's really important because, as you say in 1.1, is to provide assurance on the delivery of the capital projects program, outline material risks and how the risks are being mitigated. And certainly, I think I got a sense from the report that the second and third items are being covered, the risks and how the risks are being mitigated. But what I'm really keen to see in your executive summary is that you tick off each of those 3 things in 1.1. So when I read the report, I just don't know the extent to which you feel confident you're going to be able to deliver your capital projects program by the end of the year. So I'm really looking for that. At the end of the day, I totally understand, having been around infrastructure projects for 30 odd years, that things change. So it's not about holding get to it, but what I'm really looking to get a sense of is how do we feel that we're going in terms of delivering our capital works program by the end of the year? So that's your first point in 1.1. So what I'm looking for in your executive summary is where do I think we're going to end up? Here are the material risks, and here's how we're trying to mitigate. If you put those into the executive summary, I'll be as happy as Larry. So I just thought I'd provide that feedback would be really helpful, because I think the way that you express the purpose in 1.1 is absolutely spot on. That's exactly what this committee is keen to do. Okay, with that feedback, do any of my colleagues have any questions or comments in relation to Mark's report?
Yeah, just, Mr. Chairman, yeah, Mark, just a couple of quick questions. 4.6, minor improvements. Picking up on the chairman's, point that he's just made. We're talking about, that you think that of that $3.4 million budget, maybe 1.9 million of that work will be completed by the end of June. Am I reading that correctly? But if that's the case, then I'm just wondering, are we actually losing subsidy on that money? On that spend? On the 1.5 that's not going to be expended, because if it's at 60%, that's roughly $900,000 we're missing out on.
Yeah, so that's correct. Any money we don't spend by 30th of June this year, in those budgets, we will lose the subsidy. Correct. We
So
can't carry anything over.
Can't carry anything over, so does that mean then that we've got to reapply in the 24-25 year for completion of the project?
So that's a really good point, and something that I've been raising recently is if the projects have started, how do we deal with that, I suppose, the carryover?
Yeah.
That's a discussion I've yet to have. Yeah, because in theory, you probably wouldn't want to start anything after sort of March for fear of not completing it and losing funding. So that's a discussion I'll be having. But as my basic understanding is, unless it's spent by the end of June, it's carried over into the third year, the fourth year.
Right. Okay.
Sorry to interrupt you, Councillor Jeffries. Forgive me for asking a really dumb question. Funding from whom?
From NZTA.
It is absolutely bonkers, isn't it? That you would not be able to carry forward funding in respect of a project you've already started. That's
Exactly. Yeah, and put the subsidy at risk. That was the issue that I was concerned about.
Yes. So I need to understand that myself, but I've always been under the impression that at the end of the third year, that funding ceases and you start the next 3 years. So, and that would be, I imagine you would cover that cost from your budget. So I suppose it just comes down to very good planning. There'll be obviously a wash up period in that month of June, July, but yeah.
sorry, Councillor Jeffries.
Oh, thanks, Mr. Chairman. Oh, thank you, Mark, for that. Yeah, 4.15, this is in relation to wastewater. That additional 450,000 for having to change your methodology. Is that going to be loan funded, or is that coming out of reserves?
So the entire project is loan funded. Yeah, so that will come out. So if you read further down there, we're still expecting to stay within the existing loan funded budget because we're looking at changing the scope of one of the portions.
Right.
So we're not at the point where I need to seek additional funds for that project.
Great, thank you. 4.23, just the last sentence there. We're required to report back to Regional Council by 31 March. Are we going to hit that deadline?
Yes.
Good.
Okay, thank you, Councillor. Any other questions? Councillor Prentice.
Thank you. Through you, Mr. Chair. And Mark, you've been busy as always. That seems to be the understatement. With 4.17, the change in scope, will that materially affect the assets right at the end of the project?
Yeah, I mean, Robbie can talk a little bit more about this, but yeah, we'll be going from a replacement to a reline. And reline is still a reasonably young technology. You want to add anything to that, Robbie? Would it be?
Yeah, good question. The technology hasn't been around for long enough yet, but typically it's about between 50 years in the asset management space for relined pipes. It's certainly come a long way since the methodology came out. So there's been a lot of improvements in that space. So 50 years is pretty standard.
That was a great question. May I just follow up on that question? Staff unable to secure permission to cross the railway line, from whom?
Kiwi Rail.
Why?
Yeah, I mean, Rob can talk a bit more about this.
Careful, you're on live stream.
The issue is basically around achieving a depth underneath the railway line that meets the Kiwi Rail guidelines. There are certain provisions in there for you to engineer design the pipe to have a shallower grade, which we thought we had achieved. Unfortunately, it's still not meeting the expectations of Kiwi Rail. So that's a big factor in the fact that we need to, revisit this design, because simply we can't achieve that crossing up the railway line. It's an unachievable project. So I think one of the options.
Is it unachievable because the requirement is unreasonable, or is it unachievable because we can't ourselves meet a reasonable requirement?
Yeah, look, the application was processed and the chief engineer at Kiwi Rail has since come back and imposed some conditions that for us to meet would make it financially impossible really to deliver on that design, which has forced us to look at relining the existing asset as an alternative. Well, I guess we could develop a longer term strategy or plan for the network over that area.
It's an incredibly diplomatic answer. Robbie, you're obviously good at this. Okay, I don't think I'll pursue that any further. Thank you, Councillor Prendergast. Does anyone have any other questions? Councillor Hughes.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Just a couple of quick ones. Mark, just a clarification, what reseals claim? What is that $1 million? I can't tell you where it is on here because my computer's just started updating itself. Sorry, so.
So that's just timing around the completion of the reseals program. So we only got a claim in yesterday to NZTA, and it will only have half the reseals project. So yeah, so I suppose what I was trying to show there is the 6.3. There's some other things that are happening since the report was written that would change that number. One of them was the reseals claim.
I noted that you've run into a few issues down at the Rangatahi Street wastewater installation there. So, and they've gone, I noted it said gone from polyethylene to UPVC pipes. So what's the difference with those? Is it longer life, or is it just because you have to change the way you've done it? Is that right?
Yes, Councillor Hughes, that's exactly right. The methodology means we could go back, changing to open cut, we could go back to the UPVC pipe, which is a little cheaper. It's a dearer methodology, obviously. Polyethylene typically being used for trenchless installations.
Oh, cool. And just finally, I noted that the Waipa additional storage is, although it's ongoing, it's under budget, so I presume it's going to stay that way, is it? It's looking Still looking okay?
Yeah. Yeah, it's, so the final part of it is obviously the last reservoir to be built. Yep. And all that, the cost of the actual materials is already factored in, so it'll just be the reconnection. I think that's running pretty good to budget.
Oh, it's always nice to see things coming in under budgets. And other things, the cost these days, that's great to see for a change. Thank you.
Okay, Mark, thank you. Anyone else? Just a couple of questions for you, Mark. One in relation to the water supply section, specifically 4.9. The council's got to submit a funding plan to the water regulator on how it intends to deal with this, and it sounds like a lot of effort's going in. But my understanding is, and forgive me if I got this wrong, from memory, this water is largely used by stock, and that there's been a permanent boil water notice. So what more do you, and you haven't got a budget. So why isn't it a dear water regulator? We're not proposing to do anything.
So the first thing we need, and I discussed this actually yesterday with the rural water schemes, is we need to make sure those two water supplies are categorised correctly under the difference between the old drinking water standards and the new drinking water quality. And a lot of it's around population and treatment process. So once we've sort of finished that, then that will inform our funding plan. And if we do get them moved into a different category, I won't say lower category, because it's not, it's just a different category, that will have quite a significant impact on the funding required. It might be a simple increase in filtration or some monitoring. So that needs to really happen first before anything else will flow on. But that will be probably filling, I suppose, the bulk of that report back to Te Ōtorohanga will be, these are the things we believe. So we're just got to get that work done.
Seems to be a lot of work for stock water.
Yeah, I think we've got 90% of it goes to stock, but it still feeds a school, which is important, and also quite a few families. So as far as levels of treatment, there's still got to be a level of some treatment, even for stock, just like the Ranganui scheme, stock water only, but we still do a level of treatment. The only difference is disinfection. So, yeah.
Okay. And then the final question was in relation to the wastewater treatment plant and the abatement notice. Is there any risk of further enforcement action by the regional council that this committee needs to be aware of?
There's always a risk. The conversations I've had is that that's not an issue at the moment, as long as we prove that we are doing something heading in the right direction. This is a mechanism to, I suppose, enforce that improvement on us as you move into the level of enforcement. But there's been no indication that any fines would be coming our way. But the onus is on us now to take the next step. I would imagine if we fail to show a level of improvement or some sort of plan, that the next step is possibly further enforcement.
But as the head of the division, you're comfortable with the actions that your people are taking and you're reasonably confident?
I think we were already on a path for improvement, as we've signalled a couple of reasonable sized projects in the LTP already, which is to do with inlet improvements and outlet improvements, which is sort of will form part of our improvement plan. But I think the real immediate improvements we've got to do is get a little bit more staff on the ground and doing more daily testing. I think we've relied heavily on the monthly testing. So we'll be able to make some real quick improvements that will help give us further information. But you know, I'm quite comfortable where we are. It's always a challenge to get wastewater ponds or these sorts of plants to meet compliance.
Yeah.
And I imagine that's why well, it's not imagine, it's as why larger cities and towns eventually move to mechanical plants, because it's a controlled process. You get quick changes.
Thank you, Mark. Okay, so on that basis, in the absence of any further questions, councillor Prendergast will move and his worship will second that the committee receive the report from Mark. And Mark, thank you. It's great having Robbie here. Robbie, thank you for your answers. Much appreciated. Okay. Let's turn now to Andrew Lowe's report on the Mayoral Disaster Relief Fund policy. Andrew, welcome.
Good morning, Mr. Chair, members of the committee.
Andrew, thanks for your report. Is there anything you particularly wanted to highlight for us before we got into questions?
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. I suppose I bring this report hoping that it's never needed. It's reasonably foreseeable though that should some untoward incident happen, that it will be needed. So I think it's timely that we move to put it in place at this juncture rather than wait until we're all running around trying to deal with other matters. I brought it before this committee because this committee will have an oversight role in the management of any money that's dispersed. So yeah, happy to take questions.
I wonder if I could just kick off, just to scope out a few things. So Andrew, if I could take you to the policy itself and to and forgive me, this is page 32 of the committee's papers, and it's page 2 of the policy, and it's headed scope. Sections headed scope.
Yep.
Got it there? So you've got the sentence, all decisions for funding shall be in accordance with the principles set out in the Auditor General's principles to underpin management by public entities of funding to non-government organisations. You've gone through those principles, they're not attached here, and that's not a criticism. You've gone through the principles and you're satisfied that those principles are relevant and sensible in the context of this council.
Yes, I did read them and I thought that they applied to what we're doing here. Yeah.
Excellent. Okay, thank you. It struck me that, as you rightly say, in relation to the reporting section, which is page 5 of your policy draft, under the section heading reporting.
Sorry, page 5 of
Page 5 of your policy,
oh, yeah, page 5 of policy.
and it's the section headed reporting.
Yep.
It says a schedule of grants made under this policy will be reported to the committee within 6 months of receiving the contribution. I'm a big believer in leverage. In other words, leveraging stuff you're already doing to fulfill another requirement. And I notice that on page 6, there is a requirement to provide reports back, presumably to the government. It struck me that smart money would basically simply copy that report and give it to us rather than writing a fresh report. Would that make sense to you?
So that does make sense. It's just that there is, you only have to report to the government if you take their money.
Right.
So there could be an instance where the scale of the incident or the disaster isn't sufficient or whatever, that we don't actually apply for that grant, and yet we still receive contributions from other sources, and in which case all we would be doing would be reporting to this committee.
Okay, no, fair point, thank you. I guess all I'm encouraging you to
yes,
do is
yeah,
let's not duplicate effort if we can
No,
get away.
there would be no duplication.
Okay. And then the final question I have for you, Andrew, was Appendix A contains 2 words which sent shivers down my spine: government and guidelines. Um, which ministry or department issued these guidelines?
So the fund comes from the Prime Minister's Department. I think it's managed, having never been in that space, from reading the literature, I gathered it's managed by the Department of Internal Affairs.
Okay, all right, thank you very much. I much appreciate your work. Thanks, Andrew. Now, do any of my colleagues have any questions about Andrew's report on the draft policy? Okay, looks like this one's going to go straight through to the keeper. Well done, Andrew. So on that basis, then Councillor Hughes and Councillor Prendergast will both move in second respectively that we adopt the policy. Thank you very much for your work. Much appreciated.
Thank you, committee.
Okay, let's turn now to the climate change response plan proposed framework. It's Ross.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Good morning, members. What I'd like to do, if I may, Mr. Chair, is I've just got a handful of slides to share with you by way of perhaps making some points of emphasis, some thoughts about how the plan might develop, and mindful that this, on the face of it, appears like a plan about a plan, but I'll do my best to allay any concerns about that. Touch on
I'm not sure
timing.
where you got that idea from.
Touch on timing and who might be undertaking this work. So
Thank you.
all right, so in terms of scope, and while this is covered, I thought it was worth making the point again that this could be all singing and dancing in terms of both mitigation and response or adaptation. So I want to make it clear that there are two components in this plan that I'd like to see us move forward with. The first is in relation to us as a corporate entity, a good corporate citizen, if you like, and looking at our emissions profile and doing some work around looking to reduce those over time. So setting a baseline and then moving to reduction. That's a relatively small part of what I think the plan will cover and its intent. The larger part is working together with our community in terms of our plan for adaptation and how we might respond to achieve that. So these are essentially a summary of what's in the document. Again, emphasising that the focus of this is with and for our communities. And so I guess the point about allaying any concerns about it being a plan about a plan is bringing together from quite a number of sort of bespoke sources, a strong reliance on evidence or science and creating that context. So a lot of what you see here in terms of the structure is really around painting the picture of where we're at, what we understand about not only the global and national context, but what we are, I guess, learning and continuing to learn and know about our local context. So
Ross, sorry to interrupt. Having made the point with Andrew about leverage, you very kindly drew my attention to the Waikato Regional Council document. And I wondered whether we could basically just refer to their document for all of the background. Yes, because it's exactly the same, right? It's the international and national context is exactly the same.
yes,
And the real meat of it is, so what are you going to do for this community?
yes,
Cool.
yes. And so for members' benefit, I've just grabbed a couple of snapshots from the Waikato Regional Council plan just to give you a sense around how the look and feel and the presentation of that information might, work in our context. All right, so one of the things, so this is some thinking about how we might go about developing the plan. So this is a decision-making model. So essentially, and I can provide you copies of this. So essentially it summarizes down, there are 10 steps. The first kind of group of steps, what's happening? The second group, what matters most? So when we engage with our communities, we need to understand from their perspective what's important to them. And alongside that, what does that mean in terms of important to us from an infrastructure and asset management and service delivery context? What can we do about it is the next set of steps. Then how can we move forward and take those actions and implement them? And then a monitoring component, which is how is it working? What do we need to do more of, less of, change, whatever that context might be. And so I want to then just share with you this model, which is how it might actually work in actions. So if you look at the center of that diagram, you've got the current situation. You've got some signals, which is the triangle, what's happening in our space or the space. And this is about place and people. So what's happening in that space? What might be the trigger that we set in place to, when we get to it, then we have to look at an alternative pathway. And so I'll just use an example. Let's take the Kawhia Museum. So it's situated on the foreshore. It's within an inundation zone, a coastal inundation zone. So we know from the science that the projections indicate there's likely to be a 1 meter sea level rise. That's going to impact on that asset, that facility. Now we're doing some work with our community in the context of the concept plan for that area. So there's some thinking that has started and will need to continue, and I guess we'll run alongside this project about what does the long-term plan look like for that area, and that will be one of those pathways. But in the short term, we know we've got some assets there in the form of seawalls. We are going to go through a consenting process. I imagine we need to understand what our options are and what that consenting process, the outcome of that might deliver. So with all of that information and the triggers, we might end up with a scenario where we've got a number of different pathways or actions in the short term, and that might be for a number of years. Our focus is simply on looking at future places or locations for the likes of the Kawhia Museum to re-establish or be relocated to. Some triggers might be, well, maybe that facility can accommodate maybe 1 or 2 inundation events before something needs to happen, and that might be below floor level. So that might be the trigger then to say, for example, perhaps the first step is raising the floor level of the museum, and then over time, and so we'll use one of that's a different pathway now. We're now moving on, and then our long-term plan is we know where the relocation site or area might be, facilities like the museum. What's the next trigger? And then that then sparks the relocation of the facility before severe damage occurs. So we're preserving the asset, its ability to serve the community, and then we're preserving it in the long term through relocation. You can apply this model to almost any context. So think about the state highway into Kawhia, the same methodology and approach might apply. So that's, I guess, I don't think there's, the Waikato Regional Council. So as you've indicated, Mr. Chair, there is existing information out there. We need to take that, apply it to our context. So I guess the other message here is text light and graphic rich, and keep the document as constrained as we can.
I think those are words to live by. I think that Chief Executive and I share the attention span of a newt. And I mean that as a compliment to the Chief Executive.
And I could never comment, Mr. Chair.
So that's why I'm, you know, from a drafting perspective, simply including a link to the first 5 sections of the Waikato Regional Council plan. I mean, Chris's people have done some great work, so why not nick it?
Yep. The second thing, and I think this is where it gets more Ōtorohanga specific.
Exactly.
Is what is our commitment
Exactly.
in the context? So we start to create a more localized framework to help focus our thinking, our engagement with our community, and then look at, they've called them commitments. So the top box, you won't be able to read it, is essentially how does this link to the overall strategic direction and priorities of our organisation and our community? And then what are those areas of focus which then will lead to specific actions and that kind of pathway and decision-making process that I indicated.
Just one observation by way of feedback, without wanting to be critical to the Waikato Regional Council. It's nice having commitments, but there's no time frame there. There's no outcomes that are measurable, and there's certainly no measures of progress.
Yes.
And consistent with your comment about looking to have something that's very crisp and clear for the community, this community, I think focusing on who's going to do what by when and how we're going to measure it is going to be absolutely critical. Even, I mean, we've had a conversation in relation to capital projects where stuff changes. That's cool. But I think the problem with that sort of thing is it's too open-ended.
Yes, and so my thinking is that's simply a stepping stone. So we agree with our community what those focus areas are going to be, and then the action to deliver those. And that's when we get the specificity and the ability to track and monitor and adjust if we need to over time.
Okay, thank you. I'll come back and ask you at the end what the next steps are and what the timeline is. But before I do that, do any of my colleagues have any questions or comments? I think it's been a really useful presentation. Councillor Jim, please.
Yeah, thanks, Mr. Chairman. Yeah, very, very interesting report, Ross. Thank you. I was just going to ask you to go back to the previous slide because that one that showed the map. Yeah, that one there. And Carfair and ART are missing off there. And it should be on there. Anyway,
It's gone, it's underwater.
yeah, that's the problem.
That's the bad news.
That's the bad news. How do I get home tonight? Yeah, just picking up on a point that you made, Mr. Chairman. Ross, in terms of being a little more specific, and I don't know whether that's possible to be more specific at this stage, but in the report, on page 2 of the report, and it's under point 4.5, it's the last bullet point. And it talks about funding and investment needs, blah, blah, blah. But I'm just wondering, I know that council has provided over the next 3 years something in excess of 300,000 for what it intends to do in terms of climate change response. But I'm really interested to know what the regional council and even the government is planning to do in terms of funding assistance. Are we being expected to, is it every man for himself, or are we going to get funding assistance from either regional council or government to do what needs to be done in our district? And the second part of that question, I guess, is that what is local government New Zealand doing? Is it applying any pressure on government in this respect? Do you know?
There's quite a lot in that,
Yes,
councillor.
there is. Yep.
So let's, I guess, look at the policy context first, and then that may shed some light on what, if any, funding pathways may open up. We haven't seen, I guess, from the new government, anything specific in the climate change space yet. My take, though, is that I don't think any government is going to move away from the challenge that we have as a country in terms of the risks and the impacts that are associated with climate change. So the previous government was working on a policy framework. I haven't seen any specific actions articulated by the current government that would suggest any fundamental change to that. But that's not to say that there may be some change. So I think the policy context requires some greater either clarity if it is going to change, or confirmation if it isn't. And that then may provide a pathway to addressing the second part of your question around what resourcing and support might be available. At a regional level, there's no question we are going to get support from the regional council to assist with the development of this plan with our community. I can't comment on what funding may be available beyond that at this stage. But if we think about some of the likely outcomes that we're looking to achieve, there may be funding sources available. So for instance, the Kāwhia Museum, if that relocation was a matter of priority or an action, then there may be a funding pathway that's available to the trust to secure funds outside of any support that we may be able to provide.
Yeah, look, I agree and quite understand where you're coming from, but one of the concerns that I have, and I'm talking specifically about Kāwhia now, I guess, is that even if you were to relocate those buildings that are on the foreshore, there's nowhere really in Kāwhia that you can actually take them to because there's no land available. So does that mean then that, and I'm probably going too far with this, does that mean then that we may have to take land to relocate buildings?
Well, I think there's a number of ways of looking at it. So you've got, for instance, there is public land, there's the domain. Is that, and I don't want to preempt anything, but you know, that in my view, when you look at this and the concept plan work that's going on at the moment, the domain presents some opportunities around, you know, a broader focal point for the community because its location does, you know, address some of the risks that are inherent in climate change. But there are other avenues, I think, that are worth considering as options that are worth considering as well in terms of new sites or locations.
Thanks, Councillor Jeffries. I think that you raise a really good example of the kinds of trade-offs and balances that elected members, with the assistance of Tanya and her team, will have to make judgments on to give effect to the plan. I think that Ross has laid out a good framework or roadmap, as Waikato Regional Council calls it. But clearly you've signalled that there are some tricky balancing trade-offs that you as elected members are going to have to make, and unfortunately there's no getting out of that, unfortunately. So does anyone else have any other questions? Okay, thank you. So on that basis then, Councillor Jeffries, you'll move and I'll second that we receive that report. But before I let you go, Ross, what happens now?
Right. So, in terms of, timing, I'm suggesting that within the next 3 months, we can substantially, deal with two elements. One is that context element that we talked about. The other is looking at ourselves as a corporate citizen and starting to think about the things that we can advance. And then the bulk of the plan, which is engagement with the community. I think to do that well, we're looking at something like 12 months to be able to progress. There's some thinking around bringing together some reference or advisory groups across our district to help with, connecting into communities and obviously feeding back. We'd be looking at simply, I guess, getting council to endorse or acknowledge what's been shared today to give us that, I guess, the mandate. Question is who might do that work? So I think in the short term, that's likely to be me. There is specific provision going into the draft long-term plan regarding funding, and there hasn't been a decision made as to what that funding might be put to. But certainly resourcing to get things moving and hopefully keep things moving over that time.
So that's really helpful, Ross. So basically there's a context. So that'll take about 45 seconds, just make it from the Waikato region. So then the real effort goes into thinking about what are the areas that we want to cover through our consultation? What are the questions that you want to ask the community? That's going to take some really good quality thinking, isn't it? And then you're signaling that then with that thinking, you go into the community over, you're saying maybe a 12-month consultation. Okay, that makes sense. Is anyone comfortable with that?
Yes, and sorry, just one other quick question which sprung to mind. I guess that the regional council will be developing some sort of relationship with this NZTA because state highways out our way, of course, have got nothing to do with regional council or this council. So I guess at some stage, transit's going to have to be involved in those discussions. Yep.
Yes, look, I think there's two contexts to that, or two scales to that. One is a regional scale, obviously, and we are part of a collection of communities and councils, but there's also our local scale. So we shouldn't be sitting back and waiting for other things to happen. You know, if it's appropriate for us, in my view, to engage, and we have been engaging and or at least started that process, then we should just be moving ahead and making whatever progress we can. And if there's a time when scale, a collection of councils is better to come together to look at something in a more kind of regional strategic context, then I'm sure we can do that as well.
Most helpful. Thank you, Ross. So could we schedule a further report back on progress with you for the next meeting? Is it June? Right. Look forward to seeing you in June.
Thank you.
Thanks, Ross. Okay, so let's turn now. I think what we'll do is we will get through Brendan's reports, and then I think we'll break for a cup of tea, and then we'll get into public excluded. Welcome, Brendan.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Okay, so the first one is outstanding debtors. Thanks for your report. This looks like we're making progress.
Yes, absolutely.
Teresa has done a lot of work, continues to do a lot of work to chase up those people that owe us money.
Wonderful, thank you. Yeah, that's good, that's good. Is there anything either of you wanted to particularly draw to our attention before we go to questions?
I guess just, I did, in 4.9 talk about so we had, I believe it was the last meeting, where we had the public excluded talking about potential rating sales.
Yes,
And I did say that we would try and give you an update at the meeting, because we hadn't heard one back when I wrote the report. We're
do you
still
want to
having
do
trouble.
that in open session, or did you want to do that? in
Well, we're not going to
private?
go into individual
Okay,
stuff,
that's
so it's no privacy issues.
That's
why. We are still having issues actually getting an update from the debt collection agency that we've, looked those through. This is an older debt collection agency, not the one we're using now, but they already had the debts loaded with them, so we went through them to get the process started. From what I understand, they've recently been sold or taken over by an Australian firm. So we're actually now, because we're having so many issues trying to actually get any information out of them, we're in the process of looking at potentially removing ourselves from that contract, taking them back with our current ones who are doing a much better job. So we're in that process. So I can't unfortunately give you an update where it's at. I would, if I used to hazard a guess, I would say they probably haven't done anything on it, which is why they're coming back to tell us anything. But I'm only guessing there.
Okay, well, can we schedule to ask Brendan to give us an update in June?
Yeah.
I think you're heading in the right direction. Let's move as quickly as we can.
Yeah.
Thank you for that. Now, let's go to questions or comments. Does anyone have any questions or comments?
Yeah, just the one, yeah, Mr. Chairman, underwater 4.10. What can be done to get the money out of people who are not paying their water rates? I appreciate that you can't really cut their water off, because that becomes a health and safety issue.
Yeah.
And other than putting it with a debt collection agency, which in some cases people seem to ignore.
Yeah.
What can we actually do there? Because you can't sell the property simply because they're not paying their water rates and so on. So we're sort of almost got our hands tied around that particular one, have we, or not? So because we set our rates, our water rates through the rating act, we do actually could go down the path of going down a rating sale, got to that point. Obviously, if they have a mortgage, we can go to the mortgagee and claim the money through the mortgage. So we have done that with any that were outstanding at the end of last year. There's a whole heap of letters that Teresa has just done that are going to go out, I think, today or tomorrow. To people that haven't paid, just to tell them to get in touch. Yeah. But yes, no, you are right. We can't obviously cut off water because it's in the legislation, health reasons. Yeah, we can restrict it, but I don't think we've actually gone down that path recently with anyone. I guess that is an option we could look at. Whether that actually then results in paying, that probably depends on the individual, I guess.
Because there is an equity issue here, isn't it? Fundamentally, you and your fellow ratepayers are subsidising
Yes.
your other ratepayers who are refusing to pay.
Yes, exactly.
So, I would have thought that you'd want to explore every single option available to you to reduce the amount of the subsidy that your colleagues, your fellow ratepayers are having to front up with.
Yeah. So we do, like I say, with the mortgagees, we go through that, get that process underway, get the money out of them. Where they don't have a mortgage, that's where it obviously gets tricky. Don't really our only options go to debt collection. And then if it gets really bad, we could look at a rating sale, but I guess we've got to that point, I think, one from the water point of view yet. I guess because with the exception of the rural properties that are rural schemes, the town ones have only been on metered charges for about 5 years now. So nobody's probably built up a massive enough balance to consider going through a rating sale process. And most of the rural ones are actually pretty good at paying. There's not a whole heap of those that don't pay.
So forgive me for asking a dumb question, but is it not possible for you to take these people through the small claims tribunal or whatever it's called these days? That's a $10 fee to register and it's not a legal process. You don't require a lawyer, but the
Yeah.
benefit of it is that it feels legal and you've got someone making a decision and someone needs to turn up. Is that something
I
that gives
guess
some thought?
possibly, I don't know whether the rating act would restrict us. from showing
Look,
that.
I'm
haven't
just
looked.
saying, when you think about all of the options, oftentimes the psychological ones are better than the legal ones.
Yeah,
So-
I mean, we could definitely look at that, yeah.
So maybe we could, as part of the next sheet conversation as a result of this, just in terms of the options that you've identified to reduce these balances. Because it does amount to a subsidy.
Yeah, Councillor Jeffries, one of the other things I think we could potentially look at is applying penalties to those.
Yeah.
To those water supply accounts. So we've got the provision to do that. I guess when we send our 2 rating installments out, the timeframes are very consistent from year to year. So the penalty date's the same date every year, but often when we send out water accounts, it's not always exact. I mean, it just depends when the letters have been read, etc. But we've got potential to charge penalties, which could be an incentive for people to pay quicker. You know, in terms of like, I'm not going to get charged a penalty. I'll just delay when I'm going to pay it. So that certainly is an option.
Yeah, there probably is an element to some of the people that delay because there is no penalty on not paying their water versus paying their rates. There'll obviously be an element of people that wouldn't pay with penalties on because they're just never going to pay unless we go extreme measures sort of thing.
So your debtors are about $1 million.
Yep.
When you think about your revenue line, that's quite substantial, isn't it? As the head of finance, you could probably salivate at what you could do with $1 million if Teresa could collect it.
Yeah, I mean, obviously from a cash flow point of view, it'd be really nice for us to have that money as opposed to other people, but yeah, I mean, our revenue is about 22, 23 million, so yeah, it's probably 5% of our total revenue.
Tied up.
Obviously some of those are current, so yeah,
Sure.
it's the longer term stuff that's
Yep.
obviously the issue that we've spent most of our effort on.
So it looks to me like Teresa is exactly the right sort of person we need. And
Yes.
I think we need to give Teresa clear rules of, clear and unlimited rules of engagement in terms of collecting the money on behalf of the community, because that's effectively what we're doing. So
Yeah.
very much appreciate your efforts, Teresa, and more power to you. Does anyone else have any other questions in relation to this report? Councillor Hughes.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, I was just reiterate what the chairman just said about the, obviously the fisticuffs approach seems to be working for you. It's quite pleasing to see that there's a steady progress in the reduction, like the 115K, you know, between October and February. It's actually, we're going in the right direction on that, and I would presume that with the debts in dispute being $0 and you're not in too much trouble at this stage, I would assume, Teresa, getting that sorted for us. Would that be right?
Just got to be empathetic.
Yes, no, fair enough too. Although if you meant like this, the start, I was thinking perhaps the rules of engagement were.
All on them.
Yeah. Okay. No, thanks very much.
Excellent. Okay, well, thanks to the both of you for the efforts that you've made and the progress that you've made. So on that basis, I'll move and Councillor Jeffries will second that the report be received. Thank you very much, Teresa, much appreciated. So let's turn now to, before we move into morning tea, the fixed asset addition and disposal process update from Brendan. Brendan, is there anything here that you wanted to add?
No, not really. So it was more, I guess, give you the background, give you the information about what we're at, and then take the questions. I was going to have Emma, who's our assets manager, here with me, but she unfortunately had a family thing, so she had to leave urgently. So I will try and answer what I can. If there's anything from the assets point of view, Mark may be able to jump in, or otherwise it might be a case we come back to you with answers. at a later time.
So I guess the key question is, this was an issue that was raised by the auditors.
Yeah,
It's an issue that's been bugging you because, as I recall, stuff was coming in too late and putting a huge amount of pressure on you at
Yeah.
year end, is that correct?
Yes, it's also been an issue the auditors have raised, probably at least the last 2 or 3, maybe even longer years.
So
it's been a while.
from your perspective, are you satisfied with the progress that's being made and the cooperation that you're getting?
Yeah, absolutely. Happy with the progress. I mean, Emma and I, we would get on very well. We work well together. I guess in terms of the progress, I'm probably a little bit, I'd like to be a little bit further ahead, but most of that's just, the long-term plan, particularly for Emma and myself, has kind of gotten in the way. So it's just probably put us maybe a month behind where we'd probably like to be. But I think we're still in a good place. We'll get there by the end of June.
And do you think that the improvements are material enough that they'll be acknowledged by the auditors?
I definitely think so. Yes. I mean, yeah, I think what we're putting in place or have put in place will definitely, well, to my mind, will get rid of the issue.
Excellent.
Whether they think it is of course their call, but I think it's definitely sufficient.
Okay, well, well done on
People
making
that
the
come up to that,
Okay. Does anyone have any questions or comments on relation to this paper? On that basis, I'll move and councillor Prendergast will second that we receive the report. Thank you, Brendan. Let's turn now to I misspoke, there's one final report, which is the outstanding management letter points from the most recent audit.
Yep.
So as I understand it, we have made further progress and we are 9 to go.
Yes, that's our belief.
Okay.
Obviously, this hasn't been through Deloitte yet for them to say
Sure.
we have, but we believe that we've addressed basically half of what they had.
Do you think that we'll have nailed all of these items by audit time?
Yes, the one I guess that I wouldn't, we'll have nailed it, but it depends, is the one around inputs used in valuations, because obviously we don't have any valuations this year. It's a bit difficult to say
Sure.
we've done that.
Yeah.
But I would also expect it probably wouldn't be on the letter if we haven't done a valuation this year. So, yeah, so that's one we'll have to keep in the back of our mind for the next valuations to make sure that we're actually doing what we said we're going to do. Everything else, I believe, yeah, we should be fine. We're in the process of organising all the IT sort of ones, which are the ones that are in the red section at the moment. Because we did have a change of account manager quite suddenly. We haven't had a chance to have that meeting. I think Billy's just been off sick for a little bit, so he's just back now. So we're going to get in the process of getting that meeting organised to sort out most of those IT ones, get those moved from that red at least to orange, if not green as well.
Okay. Graham, are you comfortable with the progress that's being made?
Yes, I am.
Great, excellent. Thank you then. So on that basis, I'll move and councillor Hughes will second that we receive this report. Thank you, Brendan. And I keep misspeaking because we've got one more paper before morning tea. And that is Phil Saunders' paper on
Mr. Chair, we need to get Phil. He arrived very early, and if you just give us a minute.
That's
please.
okay. We could go to morning now. if you like.
Yeah, perhaps, Mr. Chair, just while we're just waiting for Phil, I'd just like to take this opportunity just to introduce a new staff member. There we have. So
New and not new.
yeah, new old. So some of you will had quite a bit to do with Rebecca. So last month we went through a recruitment process to appoint a new role called business improvement analyst, and I'm pleased to say that we've appointed Rebecca to that role. So I'm really excited about where this is going, and Rebecca's going to be, I guess, an integral part of this committee, and some of the work that she's going to be doing, particularly around some of our processes and I guess, massive areas that we potentially could have improvement. So she's going to start off on the in Phil's area. So there was some areas that come up as part of the IANS audit, and yeah, Phil may talk about that now. But yeah, so just to let you know that we've pinched Rebecca from the engineering department, so it's yeah. Did you want to say anything, Rebecca?
I just want to say thank you very much to Graham for the introduction, and I'm really looking forward to getting my teeth sunk into this role. Obviously, within the risk and assurance space, one of the focuses, of course, will be regulatory and legislative requirements, and keeping on top and keeping ahead of anything that, any changes on the horizon. I see that as a very important part of the role as well. But also assisting each of the teams in ways in which that we can improve our processes and systems, so that compliance just becomes business as usual rather than something that we need to focus on. So I really look forward to it and being assistance to you.
Wonderful. Thank you, Rebecca. Thanks
Oh.
for that introduction, Graham. It's great to have you here, Rebecca. Phil, welcome. Thank you for your report, and in particular, my understanding of looking to oversee what was an existential threat created by the IANZ audit. So thank you for your efforts. Is there anything, Phil, that you wanted to particularly draw our attention to before we get into Q&A? I think maybe to preempt the questions, it might be helpful if we went through the table on pages 2 and 3 and you simply confirmed everything that's been ticked off.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Just before you do that, Mr. Chair, just apologies from Tony Football, GM Regulatory and Growth. Today he would be sitting here, but he's at another meeting at 7, so we're sort of tag team.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just a bit of an update. I mean, this is a bit of a moving target as we
Yes.
as we get towards a point where we have to have this evidence into IANZ to clear these GNCs and that. So at the moment, we're expecting to clear more as we progress towards the end of March. So what's happening is we're putting the evidence in, they're looking at the evidence in the interim, and they're actually clearing a lot of those GNCs as we talk.
So Phil, I wondered whether it might be, sorry to cut across you, but I wonder whether it'd be useful if you could highlight for us the GNCs that in your mind are not yet cleared, but you expect to be cleared by 31 March, number one. And number two, if there's any GNCs that you think, crikey, we're not going to hit 31 March.
Okay, I can't give you an exact example of that because we actually have submitted a whole lot of evidence to IANZ.
Right.
And they work through that, and they work through that at their own pace, unfortunately. We don't have much control over that. But
Okay, so,
generally that.
so maybe if I ask you this question, are there any GNCs about which you're lying at wake worrying?
Yes, there's a couple, but I think that we've provided enough evidence to satisfy IANZ. And we've actually had a number of conversations with the IANZ lead auditor over that. So I'm fairly confident in my mind that we'll get there.
Okay, good. Tanya, is there anything that you wanted to add from the chief executive's perspective?
No,
This is pretty important, isn't it? It's a real strategic risk.
yeah, it's very important. And we do have a couple of staff who are absent from the team at the moment, so it's putting a bit of pressure on. We've got a solutions team who are helping and assisting. They have supported other councils that have been in a similar position, Ōtorohanga and another small council that's also had, Kauro, that's also had a large number of GNCs. And so we've had them in supporting the team. So I'm confident that Tony and Phil and Joe are across what needs to happen along with that support, that external support.
So in summary, we came from a position where there were flashing lights and sirens going off. And we think we're in a position now where those sirens and flashing lights are about to be turned off. We're pretty confident.
That's an excellent way of putting it. I think that we're on the way to resolving the issues and we'll get there. That's my view.
Well, well done. I know that would have been a pretty scary kind of time facing an existential threat. So thank you for your efforts. Do any of my colleagues have any questions or comments? Okay. Thank you very much, Phil. Fairly painless. Okay, let's finally now move to morning tea. Yeah, thank you very much. So I will move and His Worship will second the receipt of that report from Phil. Thank you, Dave. Let's close the open section and we'll take a short break for morning tea and then we'll move into public excluded.